Hey, what's going on, role players? It's the Bard here, and welcome back to the corner. Today, I want to look down the rabbit hole that is the philosophical and psychological aspect of what it is to be a role player. D&D is one of those games that I find to be very useful in its ability to be numeric, as in it taps into the part of my brain that desires abstraction, that desires creation and activity and building, and that's something I really do enjoy, because I'm a very logical thinker most of the time. I tend to enjoy abstraction, I tend to enjoy numbers, I tend to enjoy parts and seeing how things go together. I enjoy puzzles. So creating characters in D&D is a concept which I very much enjoy, which is why I tend to attract a lot of people saying, oh, can you build this or can you build that? And I'm quite happy to do it as things that go on my channel. But every once in a while, I just need to feel something, because we tend to feel more deeply, I think, as role players. We're sensitive to what it is to be a person. We're empathetic in such a way because we live so many lives vicariously through these other characters. The people we create, they have backstories, they have hopes, they have dreams, they have history, and the more you put into it, the more you understand about people and the more you understand about yourself. And there are just times when I need to put the numbers aside and just immerse myself in the character. And also, if I want to do that, I want to do it as usually something else. Call of Cthulhu, for example. Have you ever noticed that D&D is the kind of game that makes you feel powerful, makes you feel strong, and it makes you feel heroic, because you build a character and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Whereas in a game like Call of Cthulhu, you will not get stronger. In fact, chances are you will get much, much weaker. The more you learn, the less you realize you knew. And ultimately, you are in this position where you are understanding the truth about reality, and no one wants to hear it. Nobody wants to know. And I couldn't help but think that this is an amazing reflection upon reality as we experience it. So for the Call of Cthulhu investigator, they find themselves in this position where they're confronted with what reality truly is, where they see the world in all of its horror, and yet the so-called experts, the so-called people in society, and the people doing the law enforcement, and all the your peers, they don't listen. No one listens, and you feel isolated. And I think that's something that needs to be explored a little bit in general role-playing terms, because for those of you who play D&D almost exclusively, there is no isolation. There is adventure. There is victory. There is always going to be a sense of achievement. You never really lose anything. Yeah, you can lose items, but you can pick them up again, and you can lose. Your character can even lose their life, but it can usually be restored. And I think perhaps when you contrast that with a game like Call of Cthulhu, it's a completely different style of role-playing, not just because they're different games and different genres, but it's because they make you evaluate things in a different way. So, whereas D&D is a game of heroics and adventure, Call of Cthulhu is very much a game of self-reflection. Now, that might sound like an odd statement, but what I think we should try to understand is, when you build an investigator, you aren't trying to build the best investigator that you can. You're not trying to make a character who can do everything or be everything or have the best scores. You just build a character that represents what you want them to do. And this is odd, because what is a person without their identity? Because most people will look at a character in D&D and a character in Call of Cthulhu or a character in Vampire, and they are defined by a role or a class or a sect or a clan or something. Everything is like boxed, it's pigeonholed, it's put into a nice neat little package that you can use to quickly define yourself. And people really aren't like that. They really aren't. And I would contest that perhaps games like Call of Cthulhu, perhaps they're more open to the human condition. So both D&D and Call of Cthulhu offer you what is essentially a class. Now D&D is a bit more blatant about it. It offers you a class and it says this is you and this is what your class can do. Call of Cthulhu is slightly different in that it offers you a career. But the two things are opposite. One is you kind of aspiring to be, which is in D&D terms, to be a greater character or a greater bard or a greater fighter or a greater wizard. Whereas Call of Cthulhu says you already are a particular kind of person. And you don't aspire to anything greater as such. But you do aspire to knowledge, to a philosophical approach to life, to find out what is the truth. And the truth is a very difficult concept for a lot of people to grasp, because we don't want to admit to reality, especially in a social environment the way we live in. We tiptoe around people's feelings, and it's perhaps not the best thing for us because we are denying reality. And it's, as I said before, it's a wonderful reflection which is brought up in Call of Cthulhu. Why do we deny reality? If something is objective in front of us and it can be seen, why do we insist it's not true? When I'm playing Call of Cthulhu, it's not just the horror, but it's the anticipation. I want to know what's around the corner, but I don't want to see the thing because I know it will be too terrifying. It's like how people describe a car crash to you. It's terrible and you don't want to see it, but you have to look anyway. And I would suggest that Call of Cthulhu is the kind of game that if you internalize its message, if you take it all in, and you say to yourself, well, this is my character, this is what I do, this is who I am, and this is how I perceive myself in the world. And yet, when your character, your investigator, is confronted with the truth of reality, that is, there are monsters among you, there are gods in the spaces beyond, it's very difficult for those people to accept it, and their mind shatters, it fragments. Hence the sanity rolls that are forced to be made on every occasion when something challenges your perception. And I've been thinking about it for a long time, because I've been taking an interest in a lot of things that happen in various different media sources, and how everyone's sort of approaching it. Because there seems to be a lot of unusual behaviours in culture these days. And I couldn't help but bring it back to role-playing, and especially Call of Cthulhu, where people, they remain willfully ignorant of the things that go on around them, and when forced to confront those things that they find difficult to understand, their mind seems to just switch off, or it goes into like a defense mode. And I couldn't help but see this exact thing happening in Call of Cthulhu. You see something scary, you roll your sanity. That's the easy way of putting it. But the more prevalent way of thinking about it might be, you see something that challenges your perception of reality. Check to see if your mind can handle it. I would posit that role players see the world exactly as it is. That for the majority of us, we aren't led astray by people's biases, people's already preconceived beliefs, because as role players who live vicariously multiple different lives within the framework of a role-playing game, that we understand trials, we understand tribulations, we understand what it is to be people from various different walks of life, because we play elves, we play dwarves, we play humans. You put your life aside and you take up the mantle of someone else, someone who is completely different from you. And there is an element of escapism in there. There is an element of not confronting your own life, but at the same time, there is also an understanding of many people and how they understand life and how they approach life. And there is really no other way. I mean, I would feel sorry for people who play their characters the same way every time. They have one particular kind of character and they just stick to that, or one particular concept and they just do that all the time. I would feel very very sad for them. And it's not that it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's just, it doesn't give you that freedom, that range of experience. I mean, there's a great deal of difference between theory and practice. And this is something I noticed, because I do, as I've said before, I do tend to attract a number of theory crafters. And it's all academic, isn't it? I mean, it's not a bad thing just to try out new ideas and find out what works, and, you know, find out what is practical in terms of the best damage, or the best defenses, or, you know, the best skill management. But whilst that is one aspect of it, does it ever really work that way? Does it ever really work out the way we plan? Does life ever work out the way you plan? Of course it doesn't. Having the theory there is one thing, I think, but there's an old saying that experience is the best teacher. And I would say that is truer than ever, especially in the context of role-playing, because you can tell someone how to roleplay, you can tell someone how to build a character, but the actual role-playing itself is something that you have to pick up by yourself. There is no There is no right or wrong in role-playing particularly. And it's why I think that channels like mine are in some respect a necessary evil. Because I've seen in the past some people on other channels talking about people who make builds and who make different characters for others to play and who do the theory crafting and stuff. And they are ruining the game, is what they were saying. Or, do I think, or do they think that they're ruining the game? And, well, there is that aspect of it. But what I think is more important for the theoretically created character is if someone has done the numbers for you, in that this is how you build a character, this is how you build a particular style, this is how you apply these skills in such a way that it makes your character do the things that you want it to, and you've got someone there to tell you how these things function, then you just have to then put the things where you want them to be, and everyone else just can then concentrate on playing the game. And ultimately that's the important thing, isn't it? It's the playing the game. It's the immersion in the story. It's the understanding of what's going on and the expression of your character. Most of the time you just want to play the character. You just want to enjoy the story, have the social interaction, be a part of something, and it's just much easier if the numbers will play themselves. So if someone can come along and say, look, this is how you build a character to do this particular job. You want to be a thief who's an expert in climbing, or an expert in trap disarming, or an expert in lockpicking, that this is how you do it. This is how you build it. And not everyone is theoretically minded, not everyone is logic based, not everyone enjoys numbers. They want the character to do that thing, but they just don't know how to put it together. And I think that people who build characters for others in that way, say, look, here's the numbers, just apply this here, there, and wherever it's required, it's actually a big help. It's exciting to roll high numbers, and say, oh wow, I managed to roll 30 damage or something. That's it's a good score. It's a good damage score. But it's not what defines you as a character. And that brings me on to something else. You are not your job, so to speak. You are not your magic items. You are not your class. You are not your weapons. Okay, you are a character. And you are a personality. And those personalities, those are the things that need to be explored. And you can only explore that in game.